Hello everybody, welcome back to Norwich Talk for a video that I was kind of hoping when I was sat here making videos about David Wagner that I wouldn't make. One that, realistically as a pessimistic Norwich fan, you would have thought, yeah, maybe this video would come at some point this season. We kind of had the same conversations when Dean Smith was in charge, this idea of, well, what actually is the problem at Norwich City? But I'm kind of making this video now off the back of Norwich City drawing with Stoke and Huddersfield, and this sort of very brief tenure so far under David Wagner, because I'm quite comfortable now and quite cemented with what I think is wrong with Norwich, why it is the case, and where we should go, where I personally, as a Norwich City fan, would like us to go. I think there are two kind of sides to the debate, which is Norwich aren't good enough for promotion, we should be getting promoted, we need to get promoted, whereas the other side, and it's more so the side that I'm on, is, well, clearly we aren't good enough, so we should centre everything around getting ready for the Championship next season, and building again under David Wagner. First and foremost, I do just want to say, this isn't a Stoke review, this isn't a Huddersfield review. We're going to be cross-referencing those games just as evidence, but this definitely, by any stretch of your imagination, is not a match review. But yeah, secondly, David Wagner, for me, I'm not saying he's the one, he's not the man who's going to lead Norwich City to pure glory, but in terms of a management setup, I'm happy with him in charge. I'm happy he's here. Very clearly, he likes to play attacking football. If you look at the formation setup, and I do want to mention, I'm sure you've seen him on Twitter, a chap called Ben, who is called NCFC Analysis, a fabulous page. Really, really good page. The Norwich City sphere has been crying out for that kind of content in terms of if you're a tactical geek. I don't really think I am, but it's a really interesting perspective. And it's not to say that everything he says is gospel, but what he says is incredibly interesting and is well worth a follow on Twitter. I believe he does write some stuff for the Pinkin, and he kind of brought this to my attention, to sort of, I think, of quite a few people's attention, this idea of when Norwich are on the ball, you've got McLean who sits between two centre-backs, and everyone else, it's just a Hail Mary of throwing players forward. And what we've seen from Norwich City is if they can sort of break through the lines and get it to those sort of 5 or 6 players up and attack, then on the front foot, we look okay. We've scored some fantastic goals this season. But what we've also seen, especially against Huddersfield, is that when something breaks down and the ball is lost, they're so exposed. And that is kind of the major issue with the current system. And when it comes to nailing that system, maybe that system would work if Norwich City had the quality there. The main underlying issue with Norwich City as a whole is we are very much in the position that we were in when Stuart Webber first joined, which is we are at the end of a cycle. And, you look at this team, and it's not a Daniel Farker team, it's not a David Wagner team, it's not necessarily a Dean Smith team, it's kind of a team of players who, at some point along the way, kind of maybe suited a system, but there needs to be a serious shift in personnel. And do you know what? I'm very aware that as a fan of the game, it's very easy to sit here and say, we should sell him, we should sell him, we should sell him. But what else can we kind of do? You can only be so realistic to a point where it just gets boring. But yeah, you look at Norwich City, especially in the centre-back area, that's the first area that I'd like to point out. Just there isn't the quality there. Ben Gibson, Grant Hanley, just decaying in quality rapidly. To the point where I don't trust either of them, especially after today's result and performance against Stoke. Norwich should be really grateful they have Angus Gunn in goal. Fullbacks wise, meh is what I'll say. And in the middle, you've kind of got Gabriel Sara doing everything. McLean had a bit of a resurgence, didn't he, under David Wagner? But again, whilst he does run and his performance levels in terms of intensity are very high, the quality just isn't there. The passing range isn't there consistently, and to have a player in that quarterback role, you need someone who's going to be a lot more consistent, and not just consistent, but consistent at a much higher level than what sort of Kenny McLean is producing. And then in front of him, you've got Sargent and Ida, who Sargent recently hasn't been great. Obviously, he's just come back from injury, but you've got two centre forwards kind of drifting out wide and playing in this inverted winger role. It's never going to go well. You've got Pookie, who can't quite seem to find the form that he once did in a yellow and green top, and then you've got Marquinhos, this youngster from Arsenal who won't be here next season. You've also got Christos Solis, who I don't think is particularly great, to be honest with you. And you can sit here and pick out every player in the team and suggest they aren't good enough. There are players in there I'd like to keep. Sara, Nunez to an extent. Nunez is sometimes a bit of a ghost in games, but it's very clear that the quality isn't there for Norwich City to contend for top two. Not a chance for playoffs this season. It's looking unlikely, which leads me on to my next point, which is that I don't want Norwich to get promoted. And what I don't like is this idea of people who think that, such as myself. And what you see on Twitter is people sort of kind of getting up on the high horse. I saw a tweet which was sort of along the lines of, oh, you don't want your team to succeed and you don't want them to get promoted. And it's kind of like, well, I want my team to succeed, but I just don't want that to be in the way of getting promoted this season, getting humiliated again in the Premier League, having to rebuild, because we aren't Nottingham Forest, and this is the point that gets echoed around the Norwich City echo chamber. We aren't Nottingham Forest. If we got promoted this season, we wouldn't have £200 million to spend on players, plus on transfer fees, plus the wages, the astronomical wages that would require. You only see transfer fees when it comes to Nottingham Forest as an example, and by the way, they're brilliantly coached. I think Steve Cooper has done a fantastic job this season, but Norwich City don't have those financial resources to go and do that. So, in my eyes, the direction is essentially do what we did under Daniel Farke again, but just differently with a manager who has that experience of keeping a team in the Premier League on a shoestring budget, spend that season in the Championship trying to sort of perfect that formula. David Wagner obviously, tinkering with the tactics to find what works. Stuart Webber throwing a few different players where there is that communication between who you want for the system. And, it's not going to take one transfer window and then bang, everything's fixed. As we saw with Daniel Farke, it takes 3, 4, 5 transfer windows. And realistically, unless we suddenly have a giant wallop of money pumped in, that's going to have to be what we do. And if it doesn't work, then we reset and we go again, whether that's with David Wagner in charge, whether that's with Stuart Webber in charge. That's kind of the way we're going to have to go. And do you know what? Yeah, it gets frustrating. For example, this idea that Norwich are going to have to sell Gabriel Sara if we don't get promoted is frustrating. How it's like, right, we fall in love with a player, but they have to go if we don't get promoted because we need to generate funds. Yeah, it does get boring, but as Norwich fans, we kind of have to just suck it up and get on with it, really. And I don't oppose the arguments against it in terms of how we should want more, and I think we all do want more. It's just, for me, I sit on the side of, look, it's the way it is, let's just get on with it. But yeah, they're kind of my thoughts on what the issues are with Norwich City. To draw a line and say what I'd like, it's for Norwich to stay down in the Championship effectively. And I want to see Norwich play well this season. I want to see us continue to win games. And if we were to finish in the playoffs and then have a run at Wembley, I'm obviously going to support Norwich all the way and want them to win. But I just think it, like, this sort of, not revolution, this kind of reset, essentially, this rebuild under David Wagner would be easier in the Championship than it would be in the Premier League. I know you've got this idea as well of, if we do it in the Premier League, we come back down and we have parachute payments behind us, but a lot of this is underlying to the fact that I'm scared of the Premier League, I'll be honest. The last 2 times we've been there, we've been humiliated. And to be honest with you, under Alex Neil, it wasn't particularly great. It was just better than it was under sort of Daniel Farke and Dean Smith. So yeah, that's kind of where I sit. Content going forward, hopefully going to get back into the routine of match reactions, try and get some live streams going, get some guests back on. I'm not going to promise anything, but it's a very interesting time to support Norwich City. And the worst thing about it all is that we're having this absolute headache in a season where I wish we would just win the league, because we've got the kit for it. Norwich have got magnificent kits this season, so it's kind of sad. And I've got them at home. I've got them in my wardrobe. It's kind of sad that I'll look at those kits and remember this just absolute headache of a season. Not that that's particularly important, but yes, they are my thoughts on the state of play at Norwich City at the moment. I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you reckon about today's game? What do you reckon about the direction Norwich City should go in? What direction do you think they'll go in? Which direction do you want them to go in? Because we often find with football that they don't align those pathways. But yes, thank you very much for watching. Thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't, fair enough. Subscribe to if you fancy it, and I shall see you in the next one.